Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on the global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here as always.
You're welcome. Welcome to India again in this online form, but I'm sure not just in India. This is about global politics. A lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about a lot of things that we'll talk about politics here. So, but first, Irina, several big topics here, but first let's talk about the end of Doge overreach. Does it look like, it's a question mark here, but an explosive meeting between Musk and Rubio. Let's talk about how does it look like, because the Doge program seems to be still rolling out, but a lot of question marks here.
Well, essentially, Rubio accused Musk of overstepping his authority. He sidelining the State Department and co-opting the entire government. And now all of that is among questions emerging about whether Doge actually saved any money, because it actually does not seem to be accurate. It seems to be that the reported savings were exaggerated by as much as 92%, and that no matter what was actually saved, it was offset by the government spending immediately. So another issue is that Doge is now talking about going after entitlements, meaning programs like Social Security and medical care for government medical care, Medicare, Medicaid, which Trump repeatedly said he would not be doing during his campaign. So whether Trump actually authorized Musk to go after that or not, it seems to be in direct conflict with the stated goals of the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Yeah, you were saying something more?
I was just going to add that the conflict between the government agencies seems to be inevitable. Doge is not in charge with the budget for the State Department or for the other departments. It's only charged with the um, finding and reporting inefficiencies. And it was supposed to be an identifying mechanism. It was not supposed to be um, an overall authority that would also create the fixes for all the recommendations. So
Absolutely.
so it's very unclear how Doge is making its determination because accountants, actuaries, and other staffers of that sort don't seem to be involved in the process. So, so nobody really knows what's actually going on.
Absolutely. Nobody knows what's going on. So, what does this meeting, explosive meeting between Musk and Rubio is? Rubio is right now in Saudi Arabia, and Musk is on his the way he's doing things. Does it look like that Musk will halt a bit, or does it look like it is going to lead to some bigger issues out there? Because people are losing jobs. People did not anticipate this, and they don't. They also know that Musk has authority, but in a limited manner. He is perhaps acting in his own way. How do you look at this? People are trying to understand it in different ways, Irina.
Well, what Trump said during the meeting was that from now on they would be going at it with a scalpel and not with a bulldozer. But that has not appears to have happened after the meeting. He may have just said that to reconcile the parties and to move on with the agenda. But it seems to me that Doge is continuing to act the same way as it did. They're now going after the Department of Education. Now, the the issue from the beginning was that Trump wanted to weed out the so-called deep state. The problem is, I'm not entirely sure by what process Doge is making the determination who is a loyalist and who is a deep stater among all these other people, because it seems to be a very rushed process, and it's not. They seem to be just firing people randomly and without necessarily looking at their backgrounds. Um, and it's also not clear how these agencies are not going to be performing their functions. Um, uh, there's supposed to be a streamlining for some of the agencies, including the intelligence agencies, new missions related to uh, fighting intelligence related to fighting cartels, business intelligence, and so forth. But if there's no one left to do it, I don't really know how they're planning on making it happen. So it's all very strange. Rubio was leading the talks in Saudi Arabia, and Kellogg, who is supposed to be the special envoy for Russia and Ukraine, was sidelined. I don't know whether it was due to his comment about Ukraine and comparing them to mules that needed to be hit over the head, or this was for some other reason, but he is no longer appears to be no longer in charge of that process. So there's a lot of strange reshuffling going on as well.
Absolutely. A lot of strange reshuffling, lots of strange things happening. Perhaps if I look it from that point of view, be that as it may, let's go to Saudi, Riyadh. What's happening there? And not only Riyadh, see, a lot of things seem to be happening at different fronts between US and Russia, and Ukraine also speaking out, Zelensky talking about some ceasefire, and then this peace talks in Riyadh between US and Ukraine, and so many friends. So it's difficult to keep track. Help us understand what's happening at different fronts with a focus on Riyadh.
So, interesting enough, Saudi Arabia actually expressed interest in mediating between Russia and Ukraine well over a year ago, but at the time it seemed to be more wishful thinking than anything else. The Biden administration was not overly enthused by the prospect, but since then, Saudi Arabia was instrumental in several key moments in terms of organizing prisoner exchanges and other small instances of dialogue, which were successful. It was ultimately chosen in part because Trump himself was very comfortable with it, in part because it was considered to be a neutral territory with good relations with both sides of the conflict, and in part because they themselves were enthusiastic um, about it and wanted to be involved. Um, but the initial stages of the process were not very smooth. As I mentioned previously, the Russians and the Americans didn't take kindly to Saudis actually trying to mediate initially. It went better with the Ukrainians. Ukraine did want actually Saudi Arabia to play a more critical part, and it actually worked in their favor that Saudis um, did want to play that role. It became mutually beneficial, and we see that these symbolic talks between U.S. and Ukraine were not only attended by Saudi officials this time, and they went relatively well as far as they could go after what happened in in the last 2 weeks. But just as importantly, President Zelensky met with the Crown Prince before the talks concluded, and the meeting was not just about the process that would start. The next day, it was addressed a lot of the economic and trade issues between the two countries, including a restart of the Saudi-Ukrainian joint business forum and discussions of energy issues and other issues. The relationship between Ukraine and Saudi Arabia has been growing for a while, but this conflict and Saudi Arabia's mediation role is actually giving an opportunity for the two leaders to get to know each other better, and also for the two countries to address a lot of potential cooperation opportunities in a way that nobody really thought about previously. Sure, there was some talks about grain deal, and Saudi Arabia in the past has bought defense equipment from Ukraine, but it was sort of a low-level cooperation, but it has grown over time, and now we are seeing that for the first time, the two countries are really becoming global players, and Ukraine was never really a global player for much of its independence. It has struggled with corruption, with poverty, with different internal sovereignty issues, and all of a sudden we are seeing that it's starting to develop independent relationships with Gulf states, which could prove critical in advancing its economic goals, and also they can elevate its diplomatic status and visibility, and in itself kind of counter the idea that Ukraine is isolated, that Russia is a much bigger diplomatic player that carries more weight. This is no longer necessarily the case. I think even the Gulf states are starting to see that Ukraine has value. The controversy over the minerals deals highlighted that point. Russia has mismanaged its economic potential tremendously, and even if the war to be were to be frozen immediately, it would not necessarily resolve all the issues. And um, quite frankly, Russia has also mismanaged its diplomatic relations as well. It's still selling some things around the world, but its weapons are not really as desirable, whereas Ukraine has proven to be an extremely innovative partner, and Saudi Arabia in particular is potentially looking towards these advanced laser systems and other concepts that Ukraine has developed independently as a much cheaper alternative to what the US has to offer and what other countries has to have to offer. So this is one unexpected development from this whole situation.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. So, should we understand that either a peace deal or a ceasefire, something is very, very near, or it's still a long way? As Zelensky said, the ball is in Putin's court, and we don't know what way he wants to play it out.
Well, interestingly enough, the US has only agreed to adopt this partial ceasefire proposed by Zelensky, which, by the way, was actually proposed over a week ago at the European meeting in London. Once Russia broke through the Ukrainian front lines in Kursk and started pushing them back, it's almost as if Trump waited until the situation was practically irreversible before finally using this time to acknowledge, all right, we can meet halfway. It's now okay to restore the intelligence and assistance that he removed without any particularly good reason. Um, all of this looks very, very bizarre because there was no particular reason that he would suddenly adopt the plan that he was rejecting previously. Nothing changed. There were some new details developed with European assistance about concerning the partial ceasefire, but substantively nothing has changed. So why he would suddenly change his mind one way and then the other only speaks to the fact that perhaps this was based on Russian advice and request, and not because there's been a fundamental um, change in the peace prospects as a result of that. Um, Interestingly enough, the aid was restored without waiting for Russia to uh, conclude what its course of action, and so far there has not been a clear response over the ceasefire plan. We will see what the next few days bring. Personally, I think it's very unlikely that Russia will concede to these conditions. There's no reason to believe why they would, especially now that they broke through the front lines in Kursk, and this is an opportunity for them to try to push further. But on the other hand, during this entire time, they have not gained an inch in Ukraine. So no matter how you look at it, it doesn't look great for Russia, even with Trump's assistance, so to speak, when taking away the air defense from and intelligence from Ukrainians. Russia was not able to make any breakthroughs on the ground in Ukraine, and this is not a winning argument for them at all.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Thank you for this. Now let's understand something much better. Let's go a few days back. This Trump-Zelensky blow up in the Oval Office. How does it look like? Does it generally happen that a media briefing, a president is also, assisted by the vice president against a president of another country who is seeking some help? You are able to almost about to sign a deal, and then it's almost like an ambush, or should we call it a trap for the Ukrainian president? It led to a lot of different understanding. Some people are even asking, was it an acting from both sides? How would you like to explain it to the world who are understanding it in their different manner?
As far as I could gather from various sources, Zelensky was led to believe that he was indeed coming to DC to sign a new version of the deal after the controversy about the 500 billion that he rejected. The new deal, from what I understand, was supposed to be largely symbolic. It was basically a commitment to joint exploration of minerals that could take possibly decades to figure out where those minerals would be, and it didn't have any commitments for either side. US did not commit to any specific numbers that it demanded, and it also did not commit to any security guarantees, but it was a symbolic diplomatic win that was supposed to sort of put the two countries on a cooperative track after all the controversy about Trump calling Zelensky a dictator and demanding all that money. But in retrospect, this entire argument over dictators and so forth may have been part of the setup, because looking back, I don't think there was any deal to be signed, at least not on the day Zelensky was traveling there. Now, it's important to note that Zelensky was traveling not by himself, but bearing good news. The good news being was that Ukrainians were advancing against the Russians, and there was a pathway to victory based on what he was going to show. So he was definitely going to the White House in good faith, in a good mood, because here he was presenting the fact that they were not just losing and begging for help under those circumstances, but they were doing well and wanted additional support to continue to do even better. Uh, it was an unusual schedule wise, because usually when the two parties are about to sign a deal, they proceed with the ceremony first, and then they were supposed to have a lunch on the agenda and private discussions. Instead, they went into a discussion that was supposed to be private, but turned out to be a mini conference with press present, and some Russian journalists managed to get in, and nobody knows who invited them and how they got there. So the first part of the discussion, the one-on-one with Trump and Zelensky proceeded relatively smoothly, even though Trump was making a lot of arguments that were entirely pro-Russian and were just not factually accurate, no matter where you stand on this issue. Then Vance came in, and that was very unusual, because it's not normal for the vice president to enter these discussions, and it's also not normal for a private conversation to be in front of all of these journalists. So yes, in some ways it was very clearly a setup, but at the end of the conversation, Vance actually patted Trump on the shoulder and said, "Good job." So that also confirmed that it was a trap, that it was meant to delegitimize Zelensky in front of the public view and make it easier for Trump to then deny Ukraine aid. So it wasn't just a setup for Zelensky, it was a setup for Ukraine and for events that followed as well. More importantly, apparently, after that, this affected the behavior of other leaders, like Argentina's President Milei, who actually had very positive relations with Zelensky. He removed their joint picture from his social media after this followed, and I can only surmise that this was with Trump's direction that he did that. So there was a whole campaign also that followed that was aimed to boost Zelensky. There were rumors that were sent out that supposedly Zelensky changed his mind several times about the deal, which was not true. He cons- con- consistently stated that he was ready to sign the deal. He was thrown out of the White House and told not to return until he publicly apologized. He did not actually publicly apologize. In the consequent tweet he shared, he said that he felt that the meeting was regrettable, but he never apologized to anyone. Witkoff, however, the special envoy for Middle East, who strangely got involved in this story as well, interpreted it as an apology. And interestingly enough, after the Jeddah meetings, once the two parties had agreed to this partial ceasefire framework, Trump s- reportedly invited Zelensky back to the White House again to sign the deal. Interesting enough, that between the meeting and the White House meeting and between the Saudi Arabia meeting, the situation concerning this deal changed several times again, because Trump then, after kicking Zelensky out, then he insisted that the deal should be signed as soon as possible. Nobody knows why. But then later, once again, changed that comment as well and stated that the deal can only be signed if Russia and Ukraine agree to direct talks. So it's not. It's almost like he was doing a favor to Ukraine by with this deal after first insisting that this is something that US was demanding. It's a very strange thing, and many Ukrainians don't believe there is any deal on the table, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. So still, the world is trying to make sense of it all. Trump cutting off aid to Ukraine, re-inviting now Zelensky, understanding, and also sending a very different message to Europe that US is no longer with Europe, and Europe has to fend for itself. It has to help Ukraine if it has to, because it's about their larger security issues. Whole perception, all this. What is it that Trump wants? Is he talking about world peace here? He's talking about peace here. Is it only talking about making America great here? Why great again? Why so much of perceptional risk here, Irina? Is it well calculated, or is it pure brinkmanship? How would you look at it from all these angles?
It's very antagonistic, and if Trump's only goal is to save money and to restructure NATO in a way that is less dependent on the US, none of it is really necessary to do that. All you can do is, organize a call with all the leaders, say, guys, this is no longer working, let's do this differently. This is what I'm ready to put up. This is what you guys should be doing. We are focusing on XYZ. Let's proceed this way. So if this was the actual agenda, it would be it. People might disagree with it, but they would understand that approach. And I think this is what Europeans were prepared for. They were prepared to be renegotiating various terms of engagement inside NATO. But Trump seems to be deliberately throwing his weight around as if to say, we no longer want those relationships. And the way he's distancing him from the Europeans has affected US defense tax, is likely to affect very sensitive intelligence relationships, which Europeans may no longer feel they have to satisfy. And on top of this extremely brusque way in which he publicly humiliated an ally just to show everybody else that he can do that and he can do that to anybody, uh, On top of all of that, there was also an incident involving Poland, and Poland, unlike many European countries, has actually carried its defense weight, and it's been one of the closest U.S. defense allies. It even renamed the military base Fort Trump during Trump's first term. Clearly, a very pro-U.S., pro-Western country that is now seeking nuclear weapons as a result of this, and is now seeking to um, up its military standing military from 200,000 people to 500,000 people. Now every male is going to have to get go through military training. So this antagonistic attack first on President Duda, who was apparently kept waiting for an hour and a half for a 10-minute meeting or something like that, and then basically told to get out. Then an attack on the foreign minister, who's himself has had military experience, by both Marco Rubio and Elon Musk, in an extremely public, rude way by Twitter. This is completely unexplainable and very hostile. This is not simply a renegotiating of terms. By the way, those terms were very favorable to the US. They were established after World War II because nobody wanted to see a militarized Germany. Nobody wanted to see European infighting. US wanted to have more power and more weight, and wanted uh, these European countries to be dependent on the US on the one hand, and on the other hand, um, providing us with intelligence services and so forth. And it worked very well for many decades until Trump came along and decided that it's not enough. I mean, I think it's arguable that they should have been, that European countries should have been better prepared militarily. That this is something that should have been discussed more, somewhat more. But overall, uh, it wasn't necessary to change the dynamic of the relationship to get Europeans to put up more in whatever areas. And US has the leverage to do that without causing a massive explosion. And we are seeing that at the same time, there's also fights over tariffs. There's also threats to invade various countries, and this continuing attempt to annex Canada, which, by the way, is actually part of the Commonwealth with the United Kingdom. King Charles came out in a military Canadian uniform to send a signal. All of this is a major escalation because US is part of the Five Eyes along with Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. Should it be thrown out of this alliance, as some have already suggested, it will lose access to a lot of human intelligence, various military bases where it has reciprocity in using them with its allies, and it will be frozen out of a lot of things that make US very successful at what it does in terms of security and many other things. So it begs the question whether all of that has more to do with US pro-Russian shift than with any financial efforts to save money, because it just not explainable otherwise.
Absolutely. So several issues here, Irina. Let's look at some of these ones. So does it look like this? US has announced, end to exercises in Europe. So does this look like, full restructuring of the NATO? Does it mean, that Europe will have to fend for itself, each country on its own, or Europe will still be together, looking at some sort of, cohesive alliance against any aggression between friendly from any outside force? And thirdly, even for Poland, when it's talking about nuclear weapons, increasing its army, end of the non-nuclear proliferation, then means is it becoming a much more dangerous world, especially from point of view of Europe itself? America is far away still.
Well, there's a lot of questions here. That's for sure. What Trump actually said is that he's only going to defend countries that carry their weight in terms of defense, and those are, by the way, the smaller countries, the Baltic countries, mostly countries like Poland as well. But on the other hand, the countries that pay the least, Spain, Italy, and so forth, are also less likely to be attacked by, say, Russia. However, what we have to keep in mind is that previously all of these countries could be counted upon if US needed them for counterterrorism operations somewhere, like after 9/11. If something happens and US decides to go in somewhere, we have to ask us questions whether any of those countries will now be motivated to come back. And if these relationships are changing from alliances to transactional one-time opportunities, that means that we are on our own against everybody. And if somebody offers these countries a better deal, they may gravitate to that somebody against us, which means loss of trust, which means a much more dangerous situation. As for Europe, it's definitely taking steps to consolidate its own resources. There are talks about creating a unified European military. There have been talks about unified intelligence for many years. It's been very difficult to work out, but that is something that is they are trying to consolidate. There's also a Rearm Europe initiative that seeks to basically advance European weapons. And with US defense stocks falling, it's the European systems that are rising very quickly. So likely, we are going to see a lot more closer defense and intelligence cooperation between and among Europeans, and not so much with the United States. Regarding nuclear non-proliferation, it's a good question. It's not a desirable outcome, despite the fact that no one will argue that Poland should have the right to the nuclear weapons as much as Russia. But up until now, Poland was part of the U.S. nuclear umbrella. Now, this means that U.S. cannot be counted on to keep its obligations, and moreover, in the event that the friendly Polish government changes to a less friendly government, something like AFD or some other pro-Russian or far right or far left party, and they gain access to nuclear weapons, then you have to ask yourself a question: are we really doing that much better? Because all of this question is only as good as the allies and how much trust you put in the government to be responsible for the weapons that they have. So definitely there's definitely an increase in the risk of danger. Whether it's actually becoming more dangerous, I'd say it's a bit early to say that, but there's definitely a risk factor growth that we didn't have previously.
Right, Irene. And look, let's look also at the Five Eyes. Means US is part of it, but then Five Eyes will be looking at US differently than earlier on. And even Israel now is a bit wary of sharing intelligence with the US, seeing that it's pro-Russia tilt. How does this look like? Means different countries in the Five Eyes, Israel, Australia, Canada we know, New Zealand, and the UK. How do you see that? Do you think this all will collapse, or it will be without US now? And US and now Israel looking at US a bit differently because of its closeness with Russia.
Well, it's going to be very. It could. So far, there hasn't been any formal detente, but there's been definitely a cooling in the relations. It's going to be difficult for those other countries as much as for the U.S. because they were heavily dependent on the U.S. for SIGINT. On the other hand, U.S. has been heavily depending on the United Kingdom, especially for human intelligence. Israel, given I- Israel politically has been very much in pro-Russia camp for a very long time, but its intelligence, I think, is far more wary of Russia than its political class. And there is a concern, they especially after October 7th, that Russia is not their friend. And if US shares sensitive intelligence, it can be used to penetrate Israel, to help Hamas, and to create additional security threats. So Israel is another very close intelligence partner of the United States. If US loses access to all of this, yes, these countries will find themselves in a very difficult position fending for themselves, but at the same time, US will also be left with many blind spots. And ultimately, it's a not good situation for anyone involved. It's a mutually destructive situation, which, for no plausible reason, US is not gaining much from allying with Russia. Russia is a very anti-Western country, ideologically so. It's not going to change in the next generation, at least. I would say very safely. Um, so I'm not really sure what the big gain is to change everything overnight in favor of somebody of a country with a with a $2 trillion GDP. Okay, the oligarchs may have more money for private deals, but there are plenty of wealthy people around the world who needs a few oligarchs when there are plenty of wealthy people in every country, really. I mean, it's not worth sacrificing all these other assets, in my opinion. So this is a very strange situation that we are seeing. It's almost like the Trump administration has been hypnotized by things they think they're going to have that don't really exist.
Right, right. So do checking on this, this is the last question on this one. Means a US Russia partnership, does it look practical? How does this world look like? Because as you said, Russia thinks very differently about US and maybe a few oligarchs here and there, but that's not the world. It's the world is much more different. And if they are looking to create a new world order through this part, new partnership, does it look like very dangerous, or does it look like to be practical?
Everything that's been discussed so far benefits Russia far more than benefits US. For instance, the restoration of diplomatic relations would bring back hundreds of intelligence operatives under diplomatic cover into the US, and they would be able to roam freely in the US, considering that the US just cut its experienced intelligence task force. It unraveled anti-corruption legislation, and it unraveled corruption and oligarch-focused FBI task force. Russia has had no such restrictions. Even if US sends its personnel in Moscow, they will have much tougher time. It's not really reciprocal. It's not equal. And Russia has been targeting US intelligence with deadly weapons, and the same is not the case with the United States. So that is definitely not equal. Even if it sounds like a great opportunity, it really is not. If you look at the details, then there's been talk about economic projects and energy projects, including joint exploration in the Arctic, but that makes no sense because US doesn't need Russia to explore in the Arctic. There are Western states, including the same Canada, Norway, and Denmark, that it could be working with to do explorations. Their science, is far ahead of Russia's in that regard. Russia is not an environmentally friendly country, so I'm not sure what it has to offer. And it has just attacked a U.S. oil tanker the other day. A Russian captain of a ship uh, cut into a standing still tank. A fuel tanker, which doesn't sound like a friendly gesture. I don't really know what US is gaining from these economic or energy projects that it could not gain from somewhere else, really. And there's now talk about restarting Nord Stream 2, which Trump wanted shut down to begin with, and he boasted about how shutting it down prevented a full invasion of Ukraine during his first term. So why he would want to go back to that now? That's also implausible. U.S. is already number one producer for export of oil and gas. What does it need Russia for? I don't really understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And our last topic for the day is about Israel. Israel report, it talks about multiple intelligence and political failures over October 7th. And the thing is, even Shin Bet is now talking about Qatar of sponsoring Hamas, making October 7th possible. So, do you think anything will get impacted politically also, militarily also, any fixing of responsibilities here? And what, especially, what can they do about Qatar?
Well, in terms of Qatar, Shin Bet has been it's unique that Shin Bet has publicly accused Qatar of doing this and opened a criminal investigation. This is unheard of because up until this point they exchanged tough words here and there and used leverage behind the scenes, but they suppressed the real intelligence. The fact that they are now going into this, they're publicly investigating Netanyahu's close associates, and they're looking into Qatar's role in Hamas, and publicly making these accusations shows that the level of threat is very, very serious and undeniable and beyond shadow, and that all the methods of persuasion they've tried behind the scenes are simply not working. Qatar feels very confident in US backing, and for that reason feels like Israeli pressure is not doesn't really affect it so much. So this is unprecedented in itself, and it shows that this idea that Qatar and Israel can coexist in the same sphere is just not true. There are adversarial forces, and Qatar is doing everything possible to harm Israel, even if it is able to cooperate on some business deals with some specific people. Overall, it's doing everything possible to harm it. And uh, as long as this current political trend by Qatar remains, I don't see Israel being able to advance its relationships with any of the other Gulf states, and quite possibly with even other Arab states, because Qatar has a lot of economic influence everywhere in the Arab world, and even beyond Arab world and the Muslim world in general. It's making huge investments everywhere. So in terms of the intelligence failures, now Netanyahu is trying to prevent an independent state committee of inquiry from moving forward because he's concerned about his own role being examined. A few people have been fired. There are many questions why they weren't imprisoned put up on trial after the catastrophic failures, which included, by the way, the fact that there were twice information put forward about Hamas efforts, including very close to October 7th, and they dismissed that information. Um, I'm not entirely sure that the entire system has been changed since then to become more responsive to these types of threats. So long as the same people are still in charge and no one has been really punished, I don't know that the system is actually going to change, which makes me wonder if another October 7 like situation is not far away.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of politics everywhere, and a lot of politics everywhere. That's all I can say. There is nothing more, and for all we can do is to get you and talk about making sense of it all. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.